how things are actually on the ground. Could I ask our speakers to come up, please? Whilst you're doing that, I will point out that one of the fact sheets that we have by the door, I talked about our literature and material that we have here tonight. There is one fact sheet specifically on this, the Nakba that we are commemorating tonight. I hope that we will have enough time after the delay of showing the film, of course, and I apologize for that. These things happen in the best of worlds and in the best of circles. We have two speakers, Imtiaz Mukbil and Nick Ferryman, sitting there.
Test. Good.
And I would like Mr. Imtiaz Mukbil, my idol. I hope, like me, you read and digest his columns in the Bangkok Post every other Sunday, Soul Searching. He's a freelance journalist and writer of Travel Impact Net Newswire, amongst other things. And Imtiaz, would you like to start, please?
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart. Good evening, everyone. We're already pretty much behind time, so I'm not going to be spending too much time. I'll probably be no more than about 10 or 12 minutes in giving some context and a few opinions on where this whole Palestinian issue is going to go over the next couple of years. I just want to make 5 points. The first one, I want to put this whole thing into the broader, this Palestinian issue within the broader context of some of the geopolitical and economic changes that are taking place in the world today. We are basically seeing a global world order that is shifting more towards Asia and the Pacific. We are seeing the global leadership coming under a significant amount of change. There is a recent uprising that has started in the Middle East. Many of you might have read these books by Alvin Toffler called the first one was Future Shock, and then it was called Power Shift. Both of them seem to be happening almost simultaneously at the moment. Two of the key changes that are taking place right now is a huge change in demographics with aging societies in many of the Western countries, and a youth bulge in the Arab, Islamic, Asia Pacific countries. So this is a battle, this is a phenomena of nature that is going to have a significant impact on geopolitical issues like the Palestinian issue as well. When you get that kind of a confluence of economic shifts, demographic shifts, geopolitical shifts, one cannot be in any way separated from the other, because they're all broader parts of the same context. The key issue is whether some of these transitions are going to take place peacefully or violently. Most revolutions that I have come across tend to be violent, and I also sometimes, mostly they tend to be violent. I cite my own country, India, where eventually it became, after a whole period of violence, it certainly moved into a little bit more of a peaceful stage when Mahatma Gandhi managed to get the British out of the country. I do believe this one is probably going to be more violent than peaceful for 3 major reasons. One is that those today who are preaching freedom and democracy, transparency and accountability, are no longer practicing it. So when you don't practice what you preach, you eventually get a huge bunch of people who are coming up like is happening in many parts of the Middle East. Secondly, it is becoming impossible to fool all the people all the time. That is another issue in the technological revolution that is going to have an impact. And finally, the ability of the existing power structure to control the outcome, as was seen in Cairo, is fraying. So the history of revolutions in this context is going to, geopolitically, is going to be quite an important factor as to what happens with the Palestinian issue. Now, the second point, I'm going to talk firstly as just from a very human perspective. It comes down to a question of the value of human life. And if you noticed, I thought one of the most significant aspects of this documentary that Stuart showed It said that when this happens to a foreigner, everyone takes notice. But for Palestinians, it is daily routine. When it happens to a foreigner, everyone takes notice. But when it happens to a Palestinian, nobody gives a damn. What is the value of human life? Who decides? How? Where does it go? In an age when everything seems to be given some kind of a value, a price, there is a clear dichotomy between the value of life of a foreigner and the value of life of a Palestinian. And I think somewhere along the way, that value will need to be harmonized, communalized, before some of these issues begin to be seen from a more human perspective, rather than all the other various contexts in which they get to be seen. And from a human perspective, when you actually look at all the wonderful things that humanity is capable of doing these days, you can put man on the moon, you can solve many of the medical problems of today. Technology, wonderful these days at creating killing machines, like the kinds of stuff that you saw those tanks and bulldozers and missiles and jets and everything else. But it seems to be unable to solve some of these grassroots problems of which the Palestinian issue today is only one. So, from a human perspective, it's the ability to solve these problems and on the basis of a common value that has suddenly become lost in the grand scheme of things. I also think the inability to solve this problem is a complete failure of this generation of baby boomers and others, and to leave this problem festering the way it is and pass it on to our children is going to be a huge, for me, a monumental irresponsibility to leave this festering cancer that is there over a piece of real estate, like who knows how big, and leave this on to the next generation with all the monumental amount of money that is time, effort, money, and life that is being expended on this, and to dump this whole thing into the next generation is going to be is not just only a catastrophic failure, but a huge irresponsibility from the perspective of this present generation. Thirdly, from a religious perspective, I think this actually brings out really the worst of all the Abrahamic religions, the monotheistic faiths, because essentially all three of them are going at it in some respects or the other. The amount of lies, double standards, hypocrisy, corruption, it's just mind-boggling from just about every side that is involved in this. And it sort of it's a complete antithesis of the wisdoms that is being taught, that has come down in the history of these religions. Again, it's giving all these religions, the whole concept of monotheism pretty much a bad name. Well, in a way, that wound is pretty much self-inflicted. You sort of wonder why it's happening that way, because there is a lot of wisdom that is available within these religions to solve some of these problems. If, going back to that original issue, if that value of human life can be put into a common perspective, which is what religions essentially are supposed to do, to try and elevate that value of human life to a higher level. Fourthly, from a political and diplomatic perspective, in the last 20-30 years, you will have seen a whole bunch of new states that have emerged. If you see what happened following the breakup of the Soviet Union, suddenly all these states of the core of the old Soviet Empire, they emerged. You have now all these Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. Then you had the Yugoslavia situation, and you had all new states that came up over there. You've had East Timor. Now there is a new state that is emerging in Sudan. Well, you wonder why all these states are coming into being while there is no Palestinian state. What is actually holding this up? Everybody is getting their states. What is the geopolitics that allows some states to come into creation while this one seems to be unable to be able to do so? What is going on? Who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and why? What is the justification for all the other states to be able to come into fruition, but not this one? And finally, as a media, as a journalist, and that was referred to in the last pane over there, I came to this country in 1978, just as the tail end of the Vietnam War. I was very proud, and this was around the time when I had also, as a young journalist in the Middle East, also followed some of the very gung-ho American journalists who brought down a president who was felt to be lying at that time in the great Watergate era. It made you feel good to be a journalist. Then I landed up here, and again, one of the first things I did when I came here was to become a member of the Foreign Correspondents Club. And here too, I was very proud at that time to become part of a journalistic fraternity that helped expose the truth and bring an end to the Vietnam War. These halls in this club used to be full of journalists coming one after the other and exposing lies. Lies. And I believe they were great journalists, because to me they were really an inspiration of what journalism is all about. In your face, people out there who are out at the front lines. One of my old friends, Neil Davis, who died here eventually, made a movie about this. People who didn't sit back and listen to the media briefings, what were known as the 5 o'clock follies, because they knew them to be lies. And what was transpiring at the front lines of the Vietnam War was completely different to what they were being told in the media briefings. You felt proud to be as a journalist. People who ended wars was part of that, exposed some of the wrongdoings and the lies for the public to know, was part of the whole concept of being a journalist. And I think one of the greatest things, one of the greatest reasons for this, this continuing this festering cancer in Palestine, is that this is today the age of the embedded journalist, when people have suddenly moved away from exposing truth to becoming part of the establishment and having a trade-off between what access they get and what they actually produce and what they actually show. You don't see people on television anymore of these kind of images that are there. And when you don't see those anymore, they do not exist. And that has become part of the problem. And I have always wondered where this whole process that has shifted from people who were out there at the front line telling these kind of stories that you've just seen, to people who are no longer out there, who give you a sanitized version of what is going on in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in all these other places, and how and what role that sanitization of that mind-bending process is playing in allowing many of these conflicts to continue and fester. Eventually, you put the whole package together, and many of these things all come together in Palestine. Politics, diplomacy, journalism, the value of human life, and at the end of the day, the whole concept of wisdom as contained in the Abrahamic religions. Where is it going to go? I don't know. I think I'll leave that up to Nick. He's on for a little bit more of a detailed I think explanation on some of the geopolitics of this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Imtiaz, very much. As always, hitting lots of nails on the head. Next speaker, we've been referring to him, Nick Ferryman. He is lecturer in the Humanities and Foreign Languages Division of Mahidol University. And he also has the honor of being the vice chairperson of our group, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, PSC Thailand. Nick, please.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Imtiaz. And good evening. Imtiaz was saying I'm going to give us some geopolitics. I'm actually not. I want to focus a little bit more on the details of what we saw happen there in the documentary on the killing zone. You saw that. You saw some of the daily diet of death and destruction that's been visited on the Palestinians there in Gaza. The situation isn't very different today. In the last 10 years, some 10,000 Palestinians have been killed. And the vast majority of those are non-combatants, unarmed civilians. And what I would like to do is focus on those three internationals, not because their deaths are any more tragic than the Palestinians. They're not, and the families acknowledge that that's the case. The deaths are no more important than the deaths of all those thousands of Palestinians. But what their deaths do allow us to do is to have a look behind the scenes of what's going on in the West and what's going on in Israel as well. And I think there are two things that come to light. First of all, the Israelis operate a shoot-to-kill policy of civilians. So those are war crimes. And secondly, the American and British governments provide material, moral and legal support for the commission of those war crimes. And that's a fairly serious